Good morning. This morning we're going to talk about creating a culture of empowerment, what it is, why it matters, and how it will improve your life and business. My name is Todd Ross Nienkerk. I'm CEO and co-founder at 4 Kitchens. We make big websites. We are a distributed company. We'll talk a little bit about that later. But we started in Austin, Texas. So if you want to get a hold of me at any time, you can email me up here. You can follow me on Twitter. However, I will warn you, it's mostly puns and bad jokes, such as the following. You may not know who I am, but I'm big in Atlanta. Thank you. You're very polite. So before we get started, I do want to say that I'm really humbled to be speaking with you today. This is the first time I've had the opportunity to give this talk in front of a group of almost entirely business owners, managers, company founders. We are all peers here today. I usually give this talk in front of a very mixed crowd of developers and designers and web shop managers and ops people and owners and salespeople. So admittedly, I'm a little bit intimidated talking to you because I've learned so much from you from events like this. So many of the things that we will be talking about today are lessons I've learned from people in this room. Additionally, a lot of the stuff that I'm going to talk about are really hard-won lessons that we've learned at 4 Kitchens. These were learned through doing incredibly stupid things and offensive things or hurtful things that we didn't know were offensive or hurtful at the time. But in retrospect, we realized the error of our ways and we instituted different policies and we did a lot of soul searching. So by no means do I have the answer to anything, and by no means was this information handed down to me on high. This was all very hard won through 10 years at 4 Kitchens of making all kinds of mistakes. So finally, I also want to say that my opinions are based on my personal experience working at 4 Kitchens. My experience, I've had 2 jobs in my life. I worked at the University of Texas for a year, and then I started this company. I know less about working than the people who work with me. And that's also very humbling. So I really rely on them to tell me what the experience of working is like, because I simply don't know what it's like to work. I only know what it's like to run a company. So my opinions are based on that experience, which is very biased in all kinds of ways. It's also based on the experience that I've had in the web industry and the experience of running a company in the United States. So those of you who are here from Canada, Costa Rica, other places, a lot of this stuff might not apply to you. If you're not specifically in the web industry or the web services industry, a lot of this might not apply to you. But I hope that you can think about it, and I hope that you have some takeaways. So here's the message. The thesis statement of this morning is that I want to help people run better companies by making teams and leaders happier. So we're going to talk about really specific tactical stuff. I'm going to lay the stage about what culture means, what empowerment means, why it's important. And then I'm going to give you very tactical, practical advice that you can put into action right away. Simple things that you can do and some very complicated things that you can actually do starting right away. I want to begin with a story. So it's the summer of 2000. .com bubble has just burst. I'm working at a startup in the suburb of Dallas, Texas. The startup is called Cyber Expo. Anybody ever heard of this place? I didn't expect you to. So Cyber Expo was a company that made internet kiosks for shopping malls. Now this doesn't make any sense today because we all have the computer in our pocket. But back then, if you wanted to, chat with your friends on AIM or, check your Yahoo email account or Hotmail or whatever you did back in 2000, this was really useful. So these devices were extremely expensive and had to be very well engineered because the general public, holding a slushie and, a hot dog in one hand, they're going to come up to these machines and bang away at them. So they had to be waterproof and childproof and super safe. And I was like the token young kid gopher who just kind of did anything. I would stay up until 3 o'clock in the morning uploading videos to the advertisement plasma screens, these heavy, crazy displays that hung over these internet kiosks, and run and do errands and all kinds of things, whatever they needed to do. About halfway through that summer, we all got an email. Now, like most startups at that time, and a lot of startups now, there were all these perks, right? There's the ping pong table. There's remote working. We also had a snack room, a break room. You can take all the snacks you want, all the soda you want, all day long. And for a 18-year-old kid like me, that was just magic. Like that was the best possible benefit you could give me, was all these snacks and all these sodas. So the email we got said, hey everybody, just wanted to let you know that we're having to tighten our belt a little bit and everybody is now limited to 2 snacks per day from the break room. What did that do? Ideas? What did that do? Pardon? Orders? Orders?
Killed morale.
Killed morale. Killed morale. But what else?
Added doubt.
Added doubt? Scared people? What's the first thing you think people did after they read this email? Started looking for a job, but also
Counting how many snacks other people were having.
that, yes, exactly, started counting other people's snacks. They pulled out the calculator and they did some simple math. So let's assume that every snack costs 50 cents. You get 2 snacks per day, that's $1. There are 20 people at this company, that's $20 a day, 5 days a week, $100 a week on snacks is what they're spending. That's $5,000 a year. Is $5,000 a year going to save anybody's job? Not even close. So now people are thinking, if they can't afford $5,000 a year, how can they possibly afford me? So they did the math instantly. Then, distrust among employees. Because once you put a rule in place, what do you then have to do with that rule? Enforce it. Whose job is it to enforce the 2 snacks per day policy? Is it the office manager? He or she is too busy. They got other things going on. So who does it fall to? Everybody. Everybody started policing other people about the number of snacks they ate per day. Sally had 3 snacks yesterday. She's going to put this company out of business. She's responsible for this hateful rule, right? This is the culture that it started to create. Then you have these questions. Well, there's this rule. Do my snacks roll over? If I had 1 snack on Monday, do I get 3 snacks on Tuesday? Can I save them all up so on Friday I get 10 snacks and that's my lunch? Who's fielding all these questions? Well, the office manager, they're just told by the controller, the CFO or somebody, you need to cut expenses. Now there are all these rules. So what should they have done instead? Any ideas? Just stop them completely. Just take them all away. A half measure doesn't do them any good, right? 2 snacks bred mistrust, created rules that people had to enforce. That was somebody's full-time job. How much lost time was spent enforcing that rule and answering questions about that rule and dealing with HR complaints because Sally took 3 snacks? More than $5,000 a year, definitely, right? But let's now put ourselves in the heads of the company owners and managers. Because obviously they did not want to create that situation. They did not want to breed mistrust. They did not want to make people resentful of their jobs. So what were they thinking? They were thinking, people love the snacks. We want to keep giving people snacks, but we have to reduce costs. So let's keep giving snacks. The spirit was there, right? They had the right idea. They wanted to be nice. They wanted to provide this nice little side benefit. But by creating rules and procedure, it actually did a lot more damage than it did good. That's an example of culture going awry. So I want to define what culture is. We're going to talk about the culture of empowerment. I want to make sure we understand culture and empowerment. So culture, dictionary, the behaviors and beliefs characteristic of a social, ethnic, or age group. Let's think about different social groups that we have. We have our friends, we have our family, and we have our coworkers. According to the US Bureau of Labor Statistics, the average American works 8.7 hours per day. That's more than 1/3 of the day. That's about as much time as you spend with your family not sleeping. Coworkers are very important to us as a social group. They're arguably our biggest social group right behind family. So your work is culture. It is a social group. But culture does more than just define things. Culture affects how somebody thinks and feels about a group. So I want to do a little experiment. I want you to think about the culture of the United States. And I want to show you some pictures. So silently for a moment, I'm going to run through this quick slideshow. I'd like you to look at these images and just take a mental note of what you're thinking and feeling as you see each of these, whether you're from this country or not. Here we go. What did you feel? Divided.
Symptomatic.
Symptomatic? Anybody else? How many people here felt something good? How many people here felt something bad? How many people felt conflicted? We're all in the same country right now. Most of us are from the same country and have lived here our entire lives. We all work in the web industry. We're all business owners. We're all very like-minded, right? Because we're all part of the Owner Camp network. Yet we all had different reactions to these images. So take the photo of the soldier, which, by the way, was taken by the US Army, published on the US Army's Flickr account. Some of us think, here's somebody serving our country. I'm proud of this image. And some people look at that and they may feel sad or uneasy or anxious. It depends on the point of view. It might be politics, it might be your personal history. The point is that everybody has a different reaction. And none of us here really agrees on what the culture of the United States is. Yet we are all part of it. And that's because culture has many layers, and I want to peel those back. So let's start with human culture. So psychologists and anthropologists all agree at this point that there is a certain layer of universal human language, and that is facial expression. We all share the smile and the laugh and the frown. So even rarely or uncontacted Aboriginal tribes in remote areas of the rainforest, they also smile, laugh, cry. That's not a socialized expression. That is not a national or language-specific expression. That is a human expression that we all share. So there is something that we all share in terms of culture the world over. There's also language. And I'm going to talk a lot more about language in a little bit, but language informs our culture in deeply, deeply, deeply profound ways. It's how we communicate, reason, and in fact, how our brains operate. Language is the scaffolding that builds our brains. So if you go from one part of the United States to another, say from California to Minneapolis to Atlanta to New York, you experience different languages, different accents, different expressions, different cultures. The way people think is different. So language both reflects and informs our culture. And it transcends national boundaries, which is the next layer of culture. So the United States is different from Canada. They have different national cultures. They share a lot. The two are very similar in many, many ways, but there is distinctly a defining line between those two national cultures. Different laws, different values, and these laws reflect those underlying values. Universal health care is a value in Canada. It is not a value in the United States. Locally, from one state to another, from one city to another, from a city to a suburb, the culture is different. How many people here grew up in a suburb and then moved to a city because they liked it better? Right? Different cultures, and yet they're next to each other. And finally, there's the culture of the self. We each have our own unique experiences that we bring to the table that informs how we think and feel. Different levels of education or areas of study, different family backgrounds. So all of these layers, human, national, human, language, national, local, self, all make up culture. That's what I mean by culture. So what do I mean by empowerment? Again, the modern dictionary, dictionary.com, says the giving or delegation of power or authority. So that's what is being given, but what's being received through empowerment. The first is the autonomy to decide what you will do and how you will do it. Autonomy. What you will do and how you will do it. The second is the freedom to challenge without fear of reprisal. You should be able to say that something is a bad idea or it's being done wrong or I have a different kind of idea and not be punished for having challenged the status quo or that idea or that point. It's sharing thoughts and feelings, fundamentally, speaking your mind. The power to affect change. If you can't actually make a difference, if you can't change something, you are not empowered. So empowerment is the ability to actually do something about it, to actually change something. And finally, to tie all of these together, ultimately to be empowered, you have to own the outcome. So if you have the autonomy to do what you want, how you want to do it, if you can challenge the status quo or some notion, and if you can make the change, you have to own the result of the change, whether you succeed or fail. So in a nutshell, empowerment means controlling your own destiny. Autonomy, freedom, power, ownership. Let your team control their own destiny. Give them the freedom to do what they think should be done and let them succeed or fail, and the result will undoubtedly surprise you. So one last thing before we get into the really tactical stuff. It's important to understand why. Like, who cares? Why is empowerment a thing you should even pursue within your organization? First of all, it makes your teams happy. It's going to increase productivity, quality of work, retention. When people feel like they have a destiny over what they're doing, they can control that destiny, they have control, they're happier. We all are, right? I mean, why did we start a business? We wanted to control our own destiny. We're happier as a result, hopefully. Empowerment makes your clients happy because that attitude that your team brings to the table with your clients, they pick up on whether or not they're happy at their job, right? They're working very closely together on a regular basis. They're sharing conversations. They get together at a workshop over beers. They know what's going on. They're going to learn about your company culture, the real company culture. So a happy team is enthusiastic about the work, and that happiness is infectious. Your clients see it, hear it, feel it. And more importantly, an empowered team member has the ability to actually do something for the client. If they don't have to go through multiple layers of command and get approval to do various things, if they can just make a change to something and make that client happy on the spot, that client is thrilled. And finally, empowerment enables leadership. It enables you. So when your teams are empowered, you can delegate. You can have less on your plate. You can focus on the long-term stuff. You have more time to focus on new revenue streams, building the organization, thinking about new technologies, new services you want to offer. You're not dealing with the day-to-day of running the business. So how many people here have said to your significant other at some point, friends, family, coworkers, anybody, I feel like all I'm doing is reacting instead of planning? Right? I feel like this constantly, like every day, because this is still something we're working at. That's what it means to run a business. But the more you can delegate that stuff and not have to react to things and instead plan, the happier you are going to be and the better your organization is going to be. Because everybody's looking at you to get the tone of what's happening. If you're happy, they know that things are going well. If you're stressed out, believe me, they know it, they're worried. So let's talk about how to do that. The very first thing is language. You start with language. So for many, many, many years, people thought that language was a reflection of thought. You had an idea in your head, and language gave you the words and the physical ability to communicate that thought, to transmit that thought from your head to somebody else's. And that's a really common sense way to approach what language is. I have an idea, I want to express it and share it. I'm going to use language as the means of conveyance to make that happen. But in fact, it's the opposite. What neurologists are now discovering is that without language, we do not have thought. Language gives us the ability to think. And for those of you who are familiar with neurology, you'll know that the brain, every memory you make, everything you learn, everything you do, creates actual physical pathways in the brain. Like the brain is all of your brains are physically changing and rewiring right now, listening to me speak or checking your email or whatever you're doing, right? Your brain is physically altered by the language you speak. And therefore, the language you speak dictates your thought. It determines your thought and how you think, how you actually solve a problem or deal with a situation. So you have to start at the smallest level of language. And this is going to sound trite, but it's real. It's we, not I. It's team and coworkers, not employees. You work with somebody. They don't work for you. Those are subtle differences, but they're very, very, very important. And they come from you. We never use the word employees. We say colleagues, coworkers, teammates. Employees reinforce a power structure. Power structures are disempowering, ironically. We, not I, team and coworkers, not employees, work with, not for. Just remember those three things, and it'll start to become part of your habit. Change the language that you speak. So we've all seen posters that are like, there is no I in team, right? And we laugh at it because, let's think of, why do we laugh at that, right? We laugh at it because it shows up in those cheesy posters with like people on rowboats, and it's always in an office space-like situation where the person who hung it on the wall definitely doesn't believe it, right? That's why we think it's a cliche. That's why we think it's trite and stupid. But what if you really mean it, right? What if you're genuine and earnest about that? That's really powerful. So really pay attention to the language that you use. Next, you have to ask for input every day and in multiple ways. My philosophy is that people want to be heard more than they want to be agreed with. I'll say that one more time. People want to be heard more than they want to be agreed with. People just want to be heard. They don't necessarily want you to fix that thing or agree with them and side with them. They just want an opportunity to have their voice heard, first and foremost. How many people here have had the experience where you said something, you finally got something off your chest, and you felt so much better just having said it, right? You want your entire team to feel like that all the time. So you don't have to agree with everybody. You don't have to change policies, but you do have to listen to them. Now, everybody here, I'm sure, has an open door policy, right? We all have an open door policy. How many people really walk through that door? Honestly, let's be honest with ourselves. How many people walk through the open door that we've created? Not a lot, right? It's important to have deliberate time set aside for people to plan ahead and think about what they're going to say and what they want to bring up. Have check-in meetings company-wide in some way. It's not feasible for most of you here to meet with everybody within your organization on a regular basis. But make sure they're meeting with somebody who can do something about stuff on a regular basis. So the open door policy is great, but you have to invite them in. And you have to give them a deliberate time and space to talk to you and plan ahead. If you just walk up to somebody and say, hey, how am I doing? What do I need to change? They're going to say, I'm in the middle of something. Everything's great. Right? You have to give them time. Like, give them a couple weeks in advance to think about it. And maybe even give them the questions in advance. And the questions, by the way, need to be good. They need to be incisive. How many people here have said, hey, how are things going? And somebody says, they're fine. That's our reaction to everything. Hey, we walk up to somebody at the front desk of the hotel. How's it going today? Great. And you? Great. We don't mean that. Right? That's like just how we behave. That's our culture in the United States. How you doing? Great, great. We're not great. You have to ask the right questions. So, hey, how are you doing? I'm fine. If you could change one thing about this organization right now, what would it be? Oh, where do I even begin? Things weren't great. You have to ask good questions. What's one thing that you could change right now? What are you currently stressed out about? What are you most proud of this month? Ask questions that make people stop and really think and give real answers. Now, speaking of feedback, you have to provide these feedback channels that are accessible, non-argumentative, and genuine. Accessible, people can actually get to them easily. Non-argumentative, they're not being fought with. Nobody's being defensive about the feedback. And genuine, you actually mean it and you actually intend to do something about it. And you're not just checking off an HR checkbox. Yeah, I met with somebody. So I'm sure many of us here have heard about Toyota's Andon cord. I'm going to tell that story to remind you of a feedback channel that is accessible, non-argumentative, and genuine. So Toyota is one of those classic business examples of like how to do absolutely everything wonderfully and wow, aren't they great? But the Toyota assembly line, this one specific instance, is really fascinating. So traditional assembly lines, as envisioned by Ford and other organizations, keep the line moving. It doesn't matter if anything's broken. Keep going, keep going, keep going. Don't slow down. We're going to lose $1 million every minute, right? That's a traditional assembly line. So what happens? People miss a bolt, they miss a weld, they don't install something properly, and they're like, oh, well, can't stop the line. Slap a note on it that says this frame wasn't welded properly. So, and this is a true story. What then happens is at these old school manufacturers, it goes out into a specific lot in the distance, which is like the fix-it lot. And there are notes on all of these cars that say, here are all the things that were done wrong that we're going to have to go back and fix. How much time and labor does it take to, because this weld is down in the deep recessed bowels of the car. They have to strip everything off the car to fix a weld and put everything back on. Is that cost effective for them? No. Hopefully they just put it in a crusher, right? Just get a new car out there. So they're building technical debt. Those of you who do the technical aspect of web design, they've just built technical debt into their system. There are all these things that they have to go back and fix constantly. So Toyota took a different approach. They said, everybody on the line, as soon as you see a problem, tell us, here's how to do it. There's a cord that runs the entire length of the assembly line. It's called the andon cord. It's within arm's reach of everybody. You grab it and you pull it. The line stops. Manager comes over and says, what can we do to fix it? Thank you for pulling the cord. What do we do to fix it? And when they pull that cord, by the way, what do you expect would happen? Now, if this were like Ford and the line stops, what do you hear? Sirens go off, right? It's scary. The andon cord, there's a nice little jingle that plays and everything slows down. And if you've ever been to like a Japanese subway station, it's like that, right? It's beautiful and everything's great. So it's friendly. So it's accessible, it's within arm's reach, and everybody is encouraged to pull the cord. It's non-argumentative. When the manager comes up to them, they don't say, what are you doing? We're losing money. They say, thank you. What can we do to help? And genuine, they really mean it because they have a culture of efficiency. There are competitions at Toyotas to see how many fractions of a second they can pull off of every task. How can we move the buckets of parts and all the tools around to make repetitive actions much more efficient, reduce strain, right? Genuine. You have to own your mistakes. Be the first to admit failure. Be vulnerable. People see that. They realize that that's a good thing to be. They'll take a lesson from you. This builds trust, and trust facilitates empowerment. When people know that they can admit failure, that you're not going to freak out, and they know it because you've done it constantly, you probably fail more than anybody else within your organization on a daily basis because you didn't reply to an email on time, a client's upset, you didn't pay whatever bill, right? Admit that, talk about it. You all get better. So knowing that it's okay to fail builds trust. You have to hire the right people. So I had the privilege of being interviewed for some article at some point about the hiring process. And I talked about this thing that I had heard about that I was using as a measure at the time called the airport test. Anybody ever heard of the airport test? The airport test is when you're interviewing somebody, imagine yourself stuck in an airport with that person for 8 hours. How do you feel about that? Okay, common sense, that feels pretty good. That test seems to make sense. So I got quoted in some magazine saying that, and I got posted on Facebook, and then I read the internet comments on this article. And the very first comment said, airport test sounds like a great way to justify exclusionary hiring practices. They were right. They were right. And that's why it hurt. Look at our team. Go to our team website right now. White guys everywhere, right? The airport test is wrong. Instead, do you share the same values? Have you defined your values? Are they publicly stated? Can you show them to somebody? Do they share those values? Values. Not whether or not you can have fun with somebody in an airport for 8 hours. And talk about admitting you're wrong, right? So we talked about that as a team, the airport test and why it was flawed. Slow to hire, fast to fire? Absolutely. One bad apple spoils the bunch? Totally true. Also, finally, hire people who are better and smarter than you, always. Always, 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 and never be threatened by that. Be empowered by that as a leader. Go virtual. This is not going to be easy for most of you. You may never do this. Distributed teams, remote teams, that's some other ways this is referred to. We did this. We're shutting down our office in July. No more office. It's not great for everybody, but it's great for most people. Going virtual allows people flexibility beyond even telecommuting, which is one thing that you definitely need to provide, the ability to work from home some days per week. But it allows your team the ability to live wherever they want, to go have an adventure somewhere, to be able to support their significant other or family or children or whatever in what they need to do geographically, right? You can support people in that and talk about building trust. Man, that's amazing, right? But you have to completely change your culture. And if you want to talk about that, that's a whole separate talk. I'd be happy to give you some advice on things that we did well and things we didn't. We tried it twice. The first time was a miserable failure. And we were like, never going to happen. We're the worst. Like, we just can't. We have to have an office. We tried again a few years later, and we did it completely differently, and it worked. Let your team set their own schedules. Flexible work schedules, open vacation policies. Now, open vacation policies are sometimes referred to as unlimited paid leave. We don't call it unlimited paid leave because it's not really unlimited, right? It's flexible. It's take whatever you need whenever you want. But here's the truth of that. So we went into that arrangement with unlimited paid leave, open vacation. We heard two criticisms. One was, what if everybody abuses it? What if they just sit at home and they don't work? And they're like, you got to pay me. I'm on vacation. First of all, no, you don't. You fire them. They're abusing a policy, just like anybody abusing any policy. If they come into an organization and they start pulling that with you, they're unethical people. They don't belong at your organization. Get rid of them. So no, people aren't going to abuse it because you have to just pay attention to it. But you do have to, and here was the second criticism I got in advance. People said, you're going to create a culture in which people are competing to not take time off. And I said, never going to happen, never going to happen here. Everybody, we're cool. I take vacation. I show that I'm taking vacation. But we did the numbers, and it wasn't intentional, and nobody was actually competing with anybody else. But because no expectation about time off was set, people took less time off when we enacted this policy. So now we have to set a minimum. Now there's a minimum vacation policy. Invest time and money in your team's success. Invest in them. Junior development programs, understanding their career paths and how to get them there, having them attend the right conferences, paying for them to do things, a professional development budget. We offer a professional development budget with additions when they speak at events. So when they speak at events, they get the whole thing paid for. It doesn't necessarily come out of the professional development budget. People want to know that you're investing in them in the same way that they are investing in you. Time is the most valuable commodity. They're giving you their time, and time is finite. You have to give them time and investment in return. You have to encourage personal brands. You should never be afraid of people leaving. I can't tell you how many times I've talked with business owners and they say things like, oh, I don't want them to, I don't like the fact that they're doing work on the side. I don't like the fact that they're doing all the speaking and not putting my company logo in the corner of their presentations because they're going to get too famous and they're going to leave. Well, in that case, you're doing something wrong because they want to leave. Or they just have aspirations that you will never be able to match. And accept that. There are a lot of people who have worked at Four Kitchens who are amazing, and we were super sad that they left. But frankly, their ambitions were to start their own company, so we supported them in that. They should leave knowing that the experience they had at your organization was the best they ever had, and they want to aspire to be like that when they too become business owners and join this network. That's really powerful. I mentioned freelance work. Absolutely let people do work on their own time. Absolutely let them do freelance work. Oh, but we're competing. No, first of all, they're not really competing. The kinds of work that people can take on their own doesn't even compare with the work you're doing. It doesn't compare. They're not competing with you. Also, added benefit. There are two. First is, if you tell people you can't do work outside of this company, they're going to be resentful, right? You're controlling what they do in their free time. That's not right. So they're pissed off about that. Next, however, If somebody takes on outside work, they have to be the designer, developer, project manager, salesperson. They have to understand everything about the process in order to land that work and make it successful. And they're going to have to be super scrappy about the project because the budget is probably way smaller than any budget you work on in your company. So they're going to come back with all of this experience of like, yeah, I did this project and I found this WordPress plugin and I found this Drupal module and I found this JavaScript library and I found all these things and it's going to cut all these costs. They never would have found those tools if they had a larger budget and their default becomes, I'm just going to build it from scratch, right? Give them projects to be scrappy on and they're going to bring that knowledge into your projects. Finally, work-life balance does not mean work-life separation. It means balance. Have a balance. People should love what they do, and they should feel like they have the freedom to take it home or not. In our line of work, services industry, lifestyle business, we are our jobs. We are. For better or worse, that's the case. Don't try to create this false separation or the expectation of separation of work and life, because it's not going to happen and you're only going to disappoint and confuse people. Strongly consider adopting agile methodologies. There are definite areas where this does not work as well, like design, pretty tricky. That's something that we struggle with this, for real. This, more than anything, we struggle with, trying to make this work company-wide as we go into strategic work and design work and all of that. But the fundamental kernel of truth within this is it allows teams to self-organize around projects. Let the teams self-organize and come up with their own solutions. Similarly, don't tell people how to do things. Emphasize on goals. As a leader, your job is to say, I need this outcome by something. Do whatever it takes. Maybe here are a couple of ideas that I've thought about, but you'll probably have better ideas because you're smarter and better than me. That's why I hired you. So go figure it out. Don't tell your team what technologies or tools to use. They're the ones using them, not you. So if they get sick of GitHub one day and they want to do something else and pretty much everybody's on board, let them do it. So what? Oh, but we got to, move all this and that. They'll figure it out. They're smart. Let them do it. Let them use their own tools. You have to set boundaries beyond what the person currently feels. This means to challenge them. Some people take that power, that empowerment, and they run with it. And some people need that empowerment like thrust upon them to say, I think you could do this. I know you can do this. You're going to do this, and it'll be great. And challenge them. It'll be a little uneasy at first. They may fail a few times, but keep at it. Accept that your team knows more about your work than you do. They should have at least as much input as to what the company does as you do, overall, strategically. They know the market better than you. They know what clients want better than you. You need to listen to them. Your job is to synthesize this information and to set a vision and direction. And one of your biggest stakeholders within your organization are the people you work with. And finally, you have to constantly exemplify, pursue, and praise empowerment. It's something that you have to reinforce. When you see it, call it out and praise it. Whether it was successful or not, call it out. Regular conversations. And finally, asking for help is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of empowerment. Make sure that people know that. Ask for help yourself. If people are asking for help, they clearly feel empowered enough that they can trust you with that kind of vulnerability. So those are all the tactical things to do. I want to summarize this at a high level and talk about the guiding principles of empowerment. So here are the three things, and you should all have a handout here in front of you. Here are the three things that you can do within your organization philosophically that can help you guide your own tactics, your own strategies. First, give people control over their own destiny. Your coworkers are responsible professionals, not children. In this industry, a lot of us have the mindset of freelancers. A lot of the people that you're working with came from a freelance background or might switch into that or something. They're used to that kind of personal freedom and control and responsibility. Let them have it. They really want the freedom of freelancing and the security of a full-time job. Why not give them both? Make trust the center of your culture. Transparency, owning mistakes, vulnerability. Transparency, owning mistakes, vulnerability. That breeds trust, authentic, genuine trust. And then finally, build a company you would want to work for. So let's think for a moment, why did we start our businesses? Why did we do this to ourselves? Most people start businesses because they want to be empowered, because they had an experience somewhere else and they thought, this is bullshit, I hate this person, they are treating everybody horribly, I can do this better. And you did, right? That should constantly be guiding you in everything that you do. You wanted it so bad that you were willing to, live off savings and leave a cushy job, or at least the security of a job. Now think for a moment really hard, like really genuinely. Think about you. Think about yourself. Think about how you act. Think about what you do. Would you work for you? There are days when I'm ashamed of how I act. Ashamed. But you acknowledge it, and you improve, and you move on. And finally, generosity. I started this story with the tale of Cyber Expo and how they did this goofy thing with snacks. But that very same company, that summer, my mother was terminally ill with cancer. They gave me a month off with pay to be with my mom. That moment, I realized I want to do that. I want to pay that forward. That's the kind of company I wanted to build. Take these home or not, hang them up or not, or make your own. Please do. I think we have time for a couple of questions real quick.
Yeah, we can do two.
2 questions. Will. So the question is, for people doing freelance work, how do you manage the fact that they will inevitably use some company tool in some way, whether it's the laptop that you issued them or there's some account that they're using, like a GitHub account or whatever. I would go back to the guiding principles of empowerment. I'd look at trust, and I'd discuss with them up front. I want them to be able to come to us and say, hey, I'm doing this job. Is it cool if I use our Rackspace account for this thing or our AWS account to do this kind of thing? I mean, if they're doing it without telling anybody and it just kind of shows up, then you need to have a conversation with them and say, hey, it's probably okay if you use these company tools, but you got to tell us because we need to be aware of what's going on in these accounts that we control because it reflects on us. It kind of depends on like the clientele you work with. If you do a lot of work in like security and you need security clearances and things like that, no way, like that's a liability. If you're dealing with clients that are dealing with like protected HIPAA data or students with FERPA data, things like that, you should just be really clear with people up front and say, hey, it's cool if you do freelance stuff, but because we have these kinds of clients and there are these special rules in place, you really can't use any of this stuff for your personal work. I would just go ahead and clarify that as policy up front. Decide what your approach is, define it, write it down somewhere, and point to it. In the back. So how do we manage schedules when work is flexible? And also, I guess, when teams are distributed because they could be across multiple time zones. So at one point, we had people from California to Germany, so we were looking at a spread of about 9 or 10 hours, which isn't nearly as crazy as what a lot of companies do. That's really delicate. It's more complicated than delicate. We try to have a certain band of common hours, and our office is our Slack channel. So if you're in Slack and you're available, you're in the office, and we have a whole defined hierarchy of how to communicate. Like going up to somebody in person saying, hey, I need your help is the most disruptive and urgent and immediate, and the least would be something like email, right? It's passive, it's asynchronous. So you have to wrap this idea of like communication hierarchies in with the idea of when people are expected to be working. So we usually define some kind of a common band, and for the people who are way outside of the time zones, like people in Europe compared to the US, we usually ask whatever project they're working on, we ask that team to accommodate each other. And we'll say, hey, folks in Germany, if you could work like 2 days per week in the afternoons and evenings rather than mornings and afternoon, and then a couple days a week on the state side, we will work super early morning until noon, and that way we can have more overlap and try to get like a full work day, at least a couple days a week. It's a case-by-case basis kind of thing. And honestly, like I understand that your project managers would be nervous about this, but just give it a shot. It actually isn't quite as bad as you'd think because as long as people are accountable for the work they're doing, they're going to make it work. I'm happy to take more questions outside after this or all day long. Thank you very, very much. you.